This is a political education series addressing major policy topics. There are 7 parts in this series, each under 2 minutes in length. The purpose is to educate the voter as to why vote Democrat. Part 1, Helping the Working Class. If you believe that these people should pay taxes to support this man, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that their earned standard of living should be taxed and redistributed to raise the unearned standard of living for these folks, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that the money set aside by these people for their children's college funds ought instead to be taxed away to be redistributed to these people, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that this man, who entered the workforce sooner than this man, and who statistically will die 6 years earlier as well, ought to pay into government Social Security his entire life to pay for the retirement of this couple, but should not be allowed to accumulate any wealth, as he would in a privatized system, to leave to his family when he dies years before this man, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was wrong, and that we all ought to be judged on the color of our skin rather than the content of our character, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that the wages these workers can make should continue to be driven down by letting in millions of illegal immigrants, then you should vote Democrat. If you believe that supporting the working class means policies keeping wages low and destroying upward mobility and the American dream, then you should vote Democrat. Part 2, Improving Education. If you agree with the president of the National Education Association that when school children start paying union dues, that's when the teachers union will represent the interests of school children, then you should vote Democrat. If you believe with the General Counsel of the National Education Association that the purpose of teacher unions is to gain power via dues, and that students are far down the list, and that improving student achievement and learning need not and must not be achieved at the expense of employee rights and collective bargaining, then you should vote Democrat.
And that brings me to my final and most important point, which is why, at least in my opinion, NEA and its affiliates are such effective advocates. Despite what some among us would like to believe, it is not because of our creative ideas. It is not because of the merit of our positions. It is not because we care about children, and it is not because we have a vision of a great public school for every child. NEA and its affiliates are effective advocates because we have power. This is not to say that the concern of NEA and its affiliates with closing achievement gaps, reducing dropout rates, improving teacher quality, and the like are unimportant or inappropriate. But they need not and must not be achieved at the expense of due process, employee rights, and collective bargaining. That simply is too high a price to pay.
American public schools have been run by Democrat boards of education in all major cities since World War II. If you believe that these public schools are delivering a better education than they were before being taken over by Democrats, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that these kids in these schools are well served by the current education bureaucracy, and that they will have the same chance at improving their lives as these kids in these schools, you are waiting for Superman, and you should vote Democrat. If you believe that improving education means throwing more money at the same failing union-controlled school systems and denying these children, particularly children of the working class, a decent education and a bright future, destroying upward mobility and the American dream, then you should vote Democrat. 3. Respecting the intelligence of the voter. If you believe that you are so stupid that day-to-day life confuses you, and that policy for which you vote is just too confusing, or that you aren't paying attention and need someone to take care of you, then you should vote Democrat. If you believe that you are too stupid to make your own decisions on what doctor and what medical treatment you need, and that those decisions are best made by politicians, then you should vote Democrat. If you believe you are too stupid to choose what food you eat and what drinks you drink, you should vote Democrat. If you believe you have no right to own and cannot be trusted to safely and responsibly keep a gun, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that the government should be able to make you live here so you can use mass transit instead of living where you decide to live and getting to work how you decide to get there, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that you, the voter, are just too dumb to understand things, yet somehow smart enough to elect those who do understand them while calling you stupid, and who know far better than you every desire and need you have and how best to meet these desires and needs, then you should vote Democrat. Part 4. Intelligent Foreign Policy. If you believe that America should renege on mutual defense treaties without any discussion among our allies, Congress, or citizens, turning our backs on allies in Europe and elsewhere without consultation or warning, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that the President of the United States ought to refer American states and citizens to the United Nations Human Rights Commission, composed of such luminary human rights states as China and Libya and Iran, if you believe in equating barbaric regimes with the freest, most just nation in the history of the known universe, and ensuing states at least trying to do a job for which the federal government is responsible but which refuses to do, then you should vote Democrat. If you believe that an intelligent foreign policy consists of the American president bowing to barbaric despots and to dictators while treating democratic heads of state and allies with disdain, then you should vote Democrat. If you believe that your tax dollars should be sent to the third world to refurbish Muslim mosques rather than spent here in the United States or left in your wallet, then you should vote Democrat. If you believe that American justice is the equal of Iran's, that the federal government ought to ignore American law and not defend America's borders, and that America ought to disrespect democratic allies and prostrate itself before adversaries, then you should vote Democrat. Part 5. Protecting the Environment. If you believe that the environment ought to be dirtied by drilling here under zero environmental safeguards instead of here under the most stringent safeguards on the planet, you should vote Democrat. If you believe your tax dollars, 2 billion of them, should be given to Brazil to prop up their support of offshore drilling in Brazil by China, who will get all the oil they extract with your money, you should vote Democrat. If you believe it is okay for China to drill in our coastal waters but not for America to do so, you should vote Democrat. If you really believe that Michael Moore and Al Gore know more about global climate than Dr. Richard Lindzen, the head of MIT Climate Studies, and Dr. Hal Lewis, Emeritus Professor of Physics at UC Santa Barbara, then you should vote Democrat. If you believe that Democrat-demanded socialism is effective in protecting the environment when this is a legacy of socialist government policies, then you should vote Democrat. If you believe that no environmental protections ought to exist where we get our oil, that we should subsidize foreign nations exploiting oil reserves but not exploit our own, and allowing foreign governments to drill in our continental waters but refusing to allow American companies to drill for American oil, and if you believe against all evidence in the fraud of global warming, if you believe socialist policies protect the environment, then you probably should vote Democrat. 6. Moving America forward. If you believe the right way forward for America is to indebt generations of yet unborn children to pay for the failed social welfare programs of the baby boomer left, if you believe that spending $13 trillion borrowed dollars on failed social welfare programs is a policy we should continue, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that liberal and progressive policies help America, look at Detroit. In the 1950s, it had the highest per capita income in the nation. It is now the most liberal city in America with a living wage, powerful public sector and private sector unions, aggressive redistribution tax policies. It is a disaster. If you believe in this, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that you should not be able to work without a union boss towering over your shoulder, telling you what not to do and when to get lazy and work more slowly, and that no one else ought to be able to work on their own either, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that government employees living off your earnings ought to be able to retire at 50 years of age with 90% of their highest salary as a pension for life, plus benefits, after a career of slow-moving laziness, rather than work until they're 65 and build a 401k like the rest of us and compete for their jobs like those of us paying their salaries, then you should vote Democrat. Democrats recently voted against the 5% down payment requirement for federal housing loans, commenting that passage of such a requirement would restrict home ownership to only those who can afford it. If you believe people who can't afford homes should be given taxpayer money, your money, in order to buy homes they cannot afford, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that indebting generations to come for decade after decade of failed social welfare programs, of sacrificing our nation's future to the lazy, unproductive moochers of today, and in continuing to pay your tax dollars to slugs and thugs to improve their lives at the cost of your standard of living, and if you believe with Democrat Chris Dodd that being able to afford a home is not prerequisite for being given a taxpayer loan to buy one, then you should vote Democrat. Part 7. Supporting the Rule of Law. If you believe that 13 pages of ethics violation, serial lawbreaking, and tax evasion are the right behavior for senior government officials, you should vote Democrat. If you believe that the Constitution ought to be ignored,
where in the Constitution?
I don't worry about the Constitution on this, to be honest.
if you believe that Congress ought to make up the rules as they go,
when the deal goes down, all of this talk about rules, we make them up as we go along.
if you believe that the Speaker of the House, where all tax and spend legislation starts, should not take our Constitution seriously,
where specifically does the Constitution grant Congress the authority to enact an individual health insurance mandate?
Are you serious? Are you serious?
Yes, I am.
and if you don't believe America's laws should apply to those making them, if you do believe that the Constitution should be ignored by those making the laws, then you should vote Democrat. This is the conclusion of our series on why you should vote for Democrats. If you did not understand the enormity of the stupendous idiocy of voting for Democrats, if you care in the least about America's future, it is our hope that you understand this appalling idiocy now and vote for anyone but Democrats in all future elections. Thank you for watching.